The morning after that first night of whispers and shadows, I awoke to a thick blanket of snow, covering everything outside the cabin. The world beyond the windows was silent, almost unreal, as if the forest had been swallowed by some heavy, frozen stillness. I should have felt relief, but the quiet pressed against me like a living thing, suffocating and unyielding. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands shaking slightly, and stared out the window. The footprints in the snow that hadn't been there before were gone, replaced by the undisturbed white expanse. Yet the feeling of being watched remained, lingering at the edge of my mind. Every time I turned to the door, half expecting to see a figure standing there, I found nothing, and still, I couldn't shake the idea that I wasn't alone. By midday, I had convinced myself to explore the surrounding area. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way down a narrow path that led through the trees. The forest was mesmerizing, the pines tall and dusted with snow, branches bending under the weight. It should have been peaceful, almost magical, but the longer I walked, the more I felt that eyes were following me. I stopped. Nothing moved, just the wind, whispering through the branches. I shook my head, laughed nervously, and reminded myself I was alone. I had chosen this solitude. I had chosen to escape the rejection of my family. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt vulnerable in a way that gnawed at me from the inside. Returning to the cabin, I noticed small things that unsettled me further. A chair I had left upright was now slightly tipped. The firewood I had stacked neatly was scattered. A mug from the kitchen counter was now sitting upside down on the floor. I scowled at myself, muttering about absent-mindedness, but deep down, I knew none of it was my doing. That night, the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent, circling the room like wind through a narrow canyon. Words formed, just barely, in the sibilant cadence. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. I pressed myself against the armchair, the note from my planning of this holiday, my self-made talisman of independence, clutched tightly. Its edges glowed faintly, as if responding to my fear. I tried to focus on the fire, on anything mundane, but the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse, stretching and warping as though the cabin itself were breathing. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind, every faint rustle in the dark forest beyond the windows felt amplified. I considered leaving, driving down the mountain, abandoning the cabin entirely. But the roads were buried under snow, and the storm had intensified, trapping me here. By the third night, my nerves were fraying. The shadows weren't content to stay at the edges of my vision anymore. They moved, subtly at first, then more boldly. I would glance away from a window or a mirror, only to catch movement in the reflection seconds later. Impossible and fleeting, the cabin felt like a living entity, stretching, shifting, testing my resolve. It was then that I discovered the journal. I had been cleaning, trying to occupy my mind, when I noticed a small trapdoor beneath the staircase. It had been almost invisible, blended perfectly with the wood. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound journal, worn with age. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with scrawled handwriting and frantic sketches. I opened it carefully. The entries were disjointed, rambling, and increasingly disturbing. They come every year at Christmas. The snow carries them. The shadows whisper. I can't escape. I can't leave. Don't be alone. Never be alone. The pages detailed previous occupants of the cabin, each one arriving with high hopes of solitude and retreat, and each one gradually succumbing to isolation, despair, and something else. There were sketches of figures in the snow, twisted and humanoid, looming near the windows, faces indistinct, yet horrifyingly present. A chill ran down my spine. I realized that my own situation was repeating a pattern recorded meticulously in this journal. The cabin wasn't just old or eerie, it was a trap, A trap for those who sought to escape loneliness at Christmas. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. The fireplace refused to stay lit, and the shadows in the corners deepened to a near-black, tangible presence. The whispers returned, now urgent, almost pleading. Come outside, join us. I froze, my heart pounding violently. I knew, rationally, that stepping outside into the snowstorm could be deadly. But the sound, the voice, was almost familial, echoing with a distorted warmth that made me question reality. It wasn't my family calling me, but it sounded like them, or what I had longed for them to be. I clutched the note, its glow faint but comforting. I refused to move. The whispers circled, weaving through the room, brushing against my ears and whispering names I recognized. Names of distant relatives, childhood friends, and shadows of memories I hadn't thought of in years. The longer I stayed inside, the stronger the pull became. It wasn't just voices. Shadows began to take shape near the windows. Vaguely human, their faces indistinct but familiar, almost like mirrors of people I had once known. My body trembled violently, but I refused to give in. Hours passed. I lost track of time. The snowstorm outside raged, a cacophony of wind and cold, while inside, the cabin throbbed with a malevolent energy. The shadows lingered, creeping along walls, pooling near the corners, watching, testing, and I realized with a sinking horror that the cabin itself was alive, aware of me, assessing me, perhaps even feeding on my fear. I sank to the floor, exhausted, clutching the note. I had come here to escape loneliness, to find freedom from rejection, and instead, I had walked into a cage. The journal lay open beside me, its pages whispering warnings. They watch. They wait. Do not trust the snow. Do not trust the shadows. Morning came finally. Though it offered little comfort, the snow outside had piled impossibly high, and the forest looked denser, darker than before. My footprints from the previous day had vanished, as though they had never existed. The cabin, for all its cozy charm, seemed to pulse with quiet menace. I began to understand something crucial. I hadn't simply bought a mountain house to spend Christmas alone. I had bought a vessel for something ancient, patient, and cunning. Something that fed on the longing for connection, the desire to escape hurt. Something that was aware of my every thought, every fear, and it was patient. I realized then that leaving wouldn't be simple. The paths through the forest were hidden, the snow too deep to navigate alone, and the cabin itself seemed to resist my attempts to flee. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper reminded me that the mountain had chosen me for this Christmas. I had thought isolation would bring freedom. Instead, it had brought scrutiny, terror, and the creeping certainty that I was no longer alone in the world I had carved for myself. And I didn't know if I wanted to survive the next night.